Welcome to Being Reintegrated. My name is Tim Wright, and today we're going to talk about Section 5 of the Treatise of Reintegration of Beings. Once again, thank you to all my subscribers, and enjoy this episode. So I did some research on the number 5, Treatise Section 5. Just so you know what I'm using, I use the Amadou version. It's in French, but we have enough tools now to help us get into an understanding of these materials. So Amadou's Section 5, it is in the English, we're primarily looking at the fall of the primary beings. So I'll read it. It's called The Kind of Transgressions of These First Spirits and Their Punishment. If you were to ask me, the nature of these spirits' transgression was so that the Creator had to use the force of divine law against them, I will answer that these first spirits were only emanated to act as secondary causes, and not in any way to exercise their power upon the primary causes, or upon the action of divinity itself, since they were only secondary agents. They should have been jealous only of their secondary powers, virtues, and operations, and not busy themselves with forestalling the Creator's thought and all of his divine operations, whether of the past, the present, or the future. Firstly, their crime was to have been willing to condemn the divine eternity. Secondly, to have been willing to limit the divine omnipotence in the same operations of creation. And thirdly, to have brought their spiritual thoughts to the point of willing to be creators of third and fourth causes, which they knew were innate in the omnipotence of the Creator, and which we call the quadruple divine essence. How could they condemn the divine eternity? By wishing to make the eternal an emanation equal to their own, looking upon the Creator only as a being like themselves, and that consequently they should produce spiritual creatures who would immediately be subordinated to them, just as they were subordinated to the Creator. This is what we call the principle of spiritual evil, being certain that every ill will conceived by the Spirit is always criminal before the Creator, even if the Spirit may not have brought it into effective action. It is in punishment of this simple criminal will that the first spirits were precipitated to places of subjection, privation, and impure misery by the sole power of the Creator, and contrary to their spiritual being, which was simple and pure through their emanation. This will be explained. So, I wore specifically for this occasion my William Blake sweater, which shows a Creator working on creation. I love this sweater. I got it from the Tate Museum during the Blake exhibition, which I wasn't able to actually attend. I paid for the ticket, and believe it or not, the night of my flight from the United States to London, my passport got stolen in a breaking and entering of a car. It was horrible. But, I got the sweater to be able to prove to myself that Blake had some value. So I was really happy to wear that. Anyway, in the United States, meanwhile, here in the U.S., so we're reading this in the version of Amadou, which you can see in the description on Patreon. I provide that to the members who are willing to contribute to the success, so they get extra goodies all the time, including links to exclusive books that you can't buy on the general market. So, what happened was I referenced this in a study, essentially, and what we're looking at pretty much is, let me go to the document. Okay, so the Amadou version it retains the same core ideas, but includes subtle nuances that highlight a theological depth, particularly in the nature and implications of the Spirit's transgressions. There's some key distinctions that I think are appropriate for this commentary. And, we can go through other stuff, but once you hear this, you'll probably get the gist of what the entire fall is about. So it's a summary in section 5 of the psycho-spiritual nature of this fall. What precipitates it, why they fell, the state that they're in afterwards, on and on and on. So if we look at the analysis that I did, I'm not going to provide this to everybody, but I'll tell you over video. The secondary causes in their jealousy. And Amadou emphasizes that the Spirit's roles as secondary causes should have inspired them to focus only on their secondary capacities, being jealous, quote unquote, only of those powers. The word choice in French suggests a more intense rivalry or sense of entitlement, indicating they overreached out of an intrinsic desire for authority rather than mere rebellion. So I found that very interesting, that the revolt was not out of just the will to revolt. It was, in Amadou's choice of words, it was a sense of, I need authority over myself. So their sovereignty was essentially what made them say that I don't need to subject myself to any devotion or worship, or what was known later in Merkabah mysticism as halakha. He goes on with a couple of other points. The condemnation of divine eternity. In the Amadou text, the transgression warns against divine eternity comes across as a foundational betrayal, a wish to make the eternal equivalent to their own emanated existence. This subtlety presents the spirits as desiring to reshape or confine the very nature of eternity, highlighting a profound misunderstanding or misjudgment about the Creator's uniqueness. This is more than a simple overreach, it's a misunderstanding of the Creator's distinct nature. And so the word choices that Amadou used as a philologist are so important. It's not just another translation, and English doesn't quite pick up the French nuance. Although I'm not going to get like, oh, you got to understand en français to be able to do this, but it does help if you're able to get somewhat of a clarification and comparison with the English and the French. But I'm not French, so I'm not, propounding some amazing French understanding that only Frenchies know. Wink to the French. So the condemnation of divine eternity, it comes about in the worship of oneself as an authority in the modes of time and space and form. Although it's very difficult to admit these metaphysical constants, this is essentially the loss of our power and the introduction of a secondary power as the state of the eternal. So I found that really interesting because it basically says that eternity is not what we think it is. It can't be categorized. So we're looking at the Mahamudra seal, what they call the Mahamudra, the great seal of the, I was going to say Alakoan, of the Vajrayana Buddhists. The Kaju sect have figured out that there's a non-discursive seal that has to go on these ultra doctrinal points that they're making. Well, I would say the same with the Alakoan, is that the seal is that it's an eternal meditation and capacity to immerse yourself in the realm of this eternal emanative power. which probably isn't even a power, but we have to use human words to be able to get close enough to this object. So we can call it a power, although it's probably more like what's talked about here, the nature of the eternal is way outside of our categories of nature. So this goes into what von Stuckrad, and then echoed by Christine Payne-Taller, calls the natura naturans and natura naturata. So creation decides that there is a nature that nature must adhere to, and that is the naturing of nature rather than nature as itself. We have a very distinct agency that we put onto nature and then expect nature to be that. And that's why I love this paragraph so much. It has so much subtlety to the French, and Amadou probably knew that when he was writing well, he transcribed Saint-Martin's manuscript, which is essentially 8018. I don't know what manuscript Amadou used, but is definitely a nuance that comes about in the Saint-Martin version, which is also Amadou's version, which he published through Diffusiones Rosicrucianae. So the next point is the desire for subordination. Amadou's text conveys that these spirits, viewing the Creator as an equal, wish to create beings who would serve them directly. This desire implies a hierarchical ambition that contradicts the Creator's established order. This is crucial because it suggests that the spirits didn't merely want power, but sought a structure in which they would be creators with dependent beings of their own. I just find that again, I mean, you're hearing the words. I'm drinking my keto coffee, by the way. You're hearing the words of a sage at this material. So that's why I'm so enthused that I was able to get Amadou's version of the Treatise of Reintegration of Beings, because what it does essentially is it goes through the subtlety of each one of these points. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory that it's crucial because it suggests the spirits didn't merely want power. They're not power mad like we are as human beings. Nietzsche figured out that the human drive is the will to power, that we are constantly seeking the fulfillment of the will to power, because the will to truth and contradiction, basically Jung's postulate, is that power cannot be obtained. So I know this happens to be on November 1st, and take with it what you will. It's not a subtle way of trying to be destructive to whatever elements are out there for power. The point is that that's what Amadou's version was, and there's not a big meta of me trying to influence people. I don't get into that stuff. Because I'm not trying to be a creator with dependent beings mentally. I'm trying to actually use the treaties to give back to people what they deserve to get out of this tradition. And, I recently got Gérard Gandet's book from France. I'm very lucky to have received that. It was a birthday present. I recently celebrated a birthday. And, the birthday present is one of the best presents I've ever received, because it is essentially a commentary by a scholar on all of this material. So there's difference in what I'm sharing with you and what the scholars share. Obviously, I can't do in a video justice to something so sage-like as Martinez's Treatise of Reintegration of Beings, but it'll give you a start to begin your exploration of the text. Couple more points here. The nature of punishment. Amadou's wording on punishment emphasizes a distinct shift from purity to impurity for these spirits as opposed to mere separation or subjugation. This portrays their punishment as not only a loss of status, but a fundamental transformation of their spiritual essence, emphasizing the gravity of their transgression in metaphysical terms. So again, it's not a fall in the sense of like we didn't get the kind of material power that we wanted and therefore were subjected to the material powers of others. It's a metaphysical confusion. So the punishment is not really, you know how they say the punishment fits the crime? Well, the punishment is exile from the metaphysical territory that these beings tried to do a mutiny on. They did a coup, and then they tried to redefine the nature of the eternal with their secondary causes, using man as their tool to try to manipulate the entire structure of man's emanation. So these beings were aware, they had like a board meeting essentially, and they got together and they said, you know what, we can't have this. We can't have an eternal being who wants us to subject to them. Because they had the will to do so, they conceived this thought. They gave birth to it. They built a golem that they then started to worship. So it's powerful, powerful stuff, and I love the way Amadou notices these distinctions in Saint-Martin's French. So the next thing is spiritual evil as criminal. The term criminal will is used in both versions of the Amadou and my English version. But Amadou's text slightly underscores the inherent corruption, definitive moral judgment that any ill will, even unacted upon, is an affront to the Creator's order. This suggests that in Amadou's interpretation, spiritual evil is both an existential and moral deviation, rooted in the very nature of the spirit's intent rather than just their actions. So we'll hear that the worst bad that we can come up with is these actions, and really the intent that we're seeing through these subtle distinctions in section 5 is showing us what it is that's actually happening. Now you can read between the lines and you can look at it as it applies to the myth that we're all living, which is exactly what Martinez was doing. He was using this form of the crime and the will and the punishment, all the points that we get in the treatise, to give not only a social commentary, such like Dante did, Dante Alighieri in the Divine Comedy, but also to give a refutation from what LaForester calls Gnostic, but I would just say it's an alternative viewpoint than the established Catholic dogma. So in summary, the Amadou version brings out the philosophical and theological implications of the Spirit's actions, focusing more on the inherent disorder their transgressions brought into the divine order. It portrays their fall not only as an act of defiance, but as an ontological shift from purity to impurity, driven by a desire for authority that clashed fundamentally with the Creator's intended structure. This perspective makes their punishment seem both inevitable and essential to restoring cosmic balance. So what you'll read in the first degree handbook, unfortunately we have to segment this stuff into definite areas that I didn't even know we were going to talk about in this particular presentation. But the first degree handbook talks about the first degree and the establishment of balance as a prerequisite to receiving the initiation. And that ties into deeper levels of initiatic information that you'll get in other degrees. Now, I'm not promising you something that's not going to exist. I'm saying that, when you get to that degree, we can talk about it or we can share it, but you won't understand these things unless you understand these things. So, fortunate for us, this section has a lot to do with the first degree, in which you see a dramatic representation of the fall, of the crime, of the temptation, of a lot of these materials. So I'm very happy to have presented to you Section 5 of the Treatise of Reintegration of Beings with a commentary.